All right, I thought I'd read this thing real quick that I think is pretty interesting. And also, it's kind of poignant to read it in thinking about just the way we think about art today. So I'll just read this real quick. It's from the classical point of view, a book written by Kenyon Cox. And I'm not exactly sure when it was written. I'm guessing early 1900s. He wrote a lot of great books. I recommend this book to everybody. The classical spirit is the disinterested search for perfection. It is the love of clearness and reasonableness and self-control. It is above all the love of permanence and of continuity. It asks of a work, not that it shall be novel or effective, but that it shall be fine and noble. It seeks not merely to express individuality or emotion, but to express disciplined emotion, an individuality restrained by law. It strives for the essential rather than the accidental, the eternal rather than the momentary, loves impersonality more than personality, and feels more power in the orderly succession of the hours and the seasons than in the violence of earthquakes and of storm. So I just thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, when you think about that, and then you think about what you see going on Instagram, you know what I mean? It's so wildly different an idea. We now think we have to shock and awe to get likes and looks and followers.
Hello, it has been a very long hiatus, but this is episode 15 of Sketchy Talk, and I am here today with Richard Luschek, and we're going to talk about sketching practice and what we like about art, what we hate about art, but he's promised not to shit over everything, so let's try that. And why don't we start with a bio?
Okay, I went to UC, the University of Cincinnati. I started as a biology major, pre-med. I thought I was going to be a doctor of some sort. And I started taking art classes because a surgeon who I was shadowing suggested that maybe I take some sculpture classes to help with understanding of form. And to take sculpture and to take drawing. So I got into drawing, and next thing you know, a few classes turned into a minor, turned into a major. I worked in a hospital long enough to realize that it wasn't for me. Also, I really liked art, and it was something that I was always pretty good at as a kid. And it kind of came natural, and it was just an interest of mine. But it's something I never considered as a possibility, as a career. So I sort of slipped into taking art classes at UC without really much research, and I really didn't know what I was doing. So I graduated with an art degree, knowing that I loved realism and traditional art, after having been in a program that didn't appreciate those things much. And, it wasn't really about learning how to draw, learning how to paint. It was more about expression. And, that stuff has its place, obviously. But, every time I would occasionally you would get made fun of as something being too Norman Rockwell if it was realistic. And I'm like, well, I really like Norman Rockwell. I don't understand the problem here. And so after school, I so wanted craft and the ability to make things. Like, I became a cabinet maker.
Really? Yeah, that's interesting.
So I worked at a cabinet shop for a few years, and then I worked as a scenic artist at Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park. I did that for a few years. And all during that time, I was kind of trying to figure out what to do, and I found an art magazine. I told this story a million times, and it had a painting in it of a model that we had been doing paintings of, really terrible paintings of at UC. The same model, but it was a brilliant painting. It blew my mind. I thought I didn't know anybody could paint that way that was alive. And it turned out to be Carl Sampson. It went, oh, wow, just in Eden Park, not that far from here. And so I went to the model in our class, and I said, Willie Mihal painted its picture. And so she gave me his phone number, and I visited him, and it sort of then sent me down a path of finding good training. And so, I started just in studying schools and looking at where to learn how to draw and paint. And I did everything from, I researched Russia, the academies in Russia because they still have brilliant schools in Russia. China had a really good training program, but that seemed a little too scary to me to go there. Just too much of a cultural difference there. And then I went to Italy, and so all this actually was based on the tradition that Carl Sampson was trained in.
It has a name, right? What's it?
Yeah, it's the Boston School of Painting. And the main teacher there was Ives Gammell.
Mm-hmm.
So he taught a bunch of people who went off and started their own schools, two of which were in Italy. And so I visited there were 3 schools in Italy. So my wife and I had a really nice trip. This was, this is like 2000. So it was easy to travel then, pre-9/11. It wasn't very crowded. We went on a great time to go to Florence and went to those schools. So anyway, they were all great schools. They really were. But then I found one in New Hampshire, also a Gammell student, Paul Abertson, who had studied with Gammell a little bit before Carl did. And I just liked his method his ideas were slightly different than some of the other schools. And also it was, New Hampshire is still an 18-hour drive, but it's not a flight across the ocean. So I thought, well, this is going to be way easier. And actually, my wife was great. She stayed home, and we have some houses that we run. So she ran the houses, and I went to study for 3 years, pretty much full time.
Wow.
At the school.
That's incredible.
Just drawing and painting. Yeah.
That's an interesting. How many students do these schools usually have?
It varied. In Italy, some of them were a little bigger, but they rarely get above 20 to 30. And I think when I was there, Paul had about 20 students, maybe even less than that. And, the nice thing is that it was, we all know how much art schools are these days. And his school so I was there from 2001 until 2004. And his school was $4,500 a year, and you got your own studio to work in.
Nice.
And so it's crazy. I have parents that come to me, can show me the work their kids are doing, and they want to take them to art school. And I have done everything in my power to talk people out of going to art school, and it's never worked.
It's going to take a huge paradigm shift, I think, to get people out of the idea that you have to get a college education,
right,
to do art. It's interesting because I think there is a shift. I mean, the difference I think between you and me is I actually went to designing school. I was in industrial design. Right. And it's interesting because our painting professor, Gil Warren, did design paintings in gouache. Right. You could paint like a whole picture of a restaurant like in 40 minutes in gouache, and it was beautiful. And even if he spilled copy on it, he could make it into something.
Right.
And he was a big admirer of Norman Rockwell.
Right.
And the whole sensibility of design is sort of much more money-making than like the process of being art. So like when I was in art school, or design school rather, we were told when we did design sketches for someone, we had 3 levels of sketches that we learned, and you would charge more for each kind. Like if it was a color sketch, you'd charge this much, and if you did a black and white sketch. And so my foundation was extremely different,
for sure,
than a lot of art schools don't talk about that at all.
Well, the interesting thing is when I went to UC, since I kind of back-ended my way into art school, I was taking things out of sequence. So I took foundations. Like, normally you apply, you get in art school, and I was just taking stuff as a minor. So I had to take foundations when I decided I want to major. I took it at the end.
Wow, interesting.
And I did it in the summer to fill it in. And what ended up happening was I ended up taking design classes. And I was like, holy moly, they're actually teaching us how to draw stuff.
Yeah.
Like, here's we'll put down a paper bag and a pop can, and you draw it. And you render it as much as you can.
Yeah, so I had a totally different education than if I'd been in fine art.
Yeah, for sure. And if I had to do it over again, I think I probably would have. There were definitely skills to be had in the fine arts department. And I don't like to, I made some great friends, and I had a lot of fun. I got a lot out of it. And so I always joke that I got a BS in biology, a Bachelor of Science in Biology, and then I got a BFA in BS. Because I really can bullshit my way through a critique, and that's one of the things that you want in art school. Saying to put up a pile of garbage and say how that expresses how you feel at that moment.
Well, it's interesting because I think that there is a pressure on schools, and it depends on the school to now teach more skills.
For sure.
There have been so many, investment in education is so expensive. Right. And it's like, you better have some sort of skill when you get out of school. So I think the attitudes about that are changing.
Right.
And I have family that study art history and stuff, and who have told me that they think that this obsession sort of with like only one type of contemporary art is just short-lived.
For sure.
And I hope that's true. I mean, I think that, and I could talk about illustration forever, I think it's gotten very short shrift among, and one of the problems that they have with teaching illustration in a typical art way is most people don't write about it. And apparently in academia, to get the heft that, say, Kandinsky has or that Rothko has, you have to have students writing about it.
Exactly.
And I know that was one of the reasons they started the Icon conferences every couple of years, was to get more education writing about. Icon is an illustration conference. It's every 2 years. It's kind of like the How conference or, similar design conferences to talk about the world of illustration.
Right.
I don't know if they've been totally successful with that. I think that a lot could improve. Like, you have the Billy Ireland Museum, for example, in Columbus, where they really encourage people to write about comics. They have a huge collection of comics, and hopefully more people are studying it or writing about it. Whether illustration will get that much interest remains to be seen in the immediate future, but I think, people are, when you talk about museums and stuff, I think people are bored and just looking at, like when they had that Norman Rockwell exhibit that was up in date, like there was a 2-hour wait to get it. People love that. And they respond to it. And, when you go to a lot of these sort of abstract shows, not to say that there's anything wrong with the work, but people seem a lot less interested in it.
Right.
Because it's not narrative, it's not story, and it's not terribly interesting.
Yeah. And it's odd because I feel like a lot of what's going on in museums, since you brought that up, is it feels like, I occasionally feel like curators and the people who run museums are upset that they're not artists themselves.
Yes.
So rather than just curate a good show, they use art to make their own installations, almost. So they're like, well, I'm going to be creative, but I'm going to use all this random stuff to create my own thing. And generally, most people aren't there to see that. They want to just see good work. And so it is interesting. I don't understand why museums don't understand that there was a line for Norman Rockwell, and that when they have a great show with great paintings,
people love, really, like Maxfield Parrish, N.C. Wyatt, people love that.
That Wyatt show at the Taft was amazing. I was there the day before they shut down for COVID, so I barely slipped in. And then, of course, was freaked out because one of the guards was like you could feel his breath on your face. He was whispering that's how great the show was, and then we left. We're like, did we just get COVID? I don't know what happened, but anyway, but that was a great show. And so
I've been to the Brandywine a couple of times.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think we've discussed at length about what we think of modern architecture, and I think the architecture in that building, while it is modern, is amazing. The way it juts out over the river, or I'm thinking of Chad's Ford.
Well, that's where it is.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's really pretty. Yeah, it does have kind of a river through Brandywine Museum. It's really nicely put together, and it's they get some great shows there.
Right.
And I think they have to kind of change how they view. I think a lot of museums would do really well with an illustration museum. Maybe what they should do is get back all the stuff they stole, because they said the Metropolitan Museum of Art has all the stolen stuff. So give it back and start an illustration with.
They should.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't think the thing UC still doesn't have are there any illustration programs in the area?
There is an art academy, but I would argue that illustration probably shouldn't be a standalone major. I think it needs to be paired with design, because it is, I think, in the design pantheon. Even if you are going to do type design or whatever, you have to know it well enough to work with a designer that is. And if you know nothing about design and you want to be an illustrator, you probably will be a terrible illustrator, because you have to know enough about composition and design to make it work. I mean, illustration has to work within parameters.
Right.
And if you don't know how to adhere to parameters at all, you're going to have a very short.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's interesting because I've become an illustrator, and that it's not really my training. And so, I mean, I guess I could talk about my training a bit. That might be interesting with some people, just because I don't think you can talk to a lot of. I mean, I consider myself. I work as an illustrator mostly, and I have a love-hate relationship currently with the fine arts. It's just gotten very strange in the gallery scene, and I don't think anybody's really figured it out, even if they think they have. I don't know what's going on. And I just know I like it when someone says, "Will you do this for me?" I do it. They like it, and then they pay.
That's the ideal situation.
That's the ideal situation, and I've found, in the fine arts market, you pour your heart into a piece of work, and it wins awards, and people love it, and it goes to shows, and and then I feel like my job then is moving it from gallery to gallery, and maybe someone will buy it. I mean, you don't know. And after a while, I mean, it shouldn't be so much about that, but it does kind of wear on you a bit. I mean, the illustration, you get the job, you do it, you get paid. And so it feels more like a transaction that makes sense. And I mean, we were talking about before in the olden days, I mean, we're talking probably over 100 years. The gallery scene was the artist did the work, the person running the gallery liked the work, he bought the work, and then he sold it for what he thought he could sell it for. So the artist got the money up front. And now galleries get free inventory. They take it on consignment, they hang it in a room, and if nobody looks at it for 3 days, they put it in the basement, and then the artist is wondering why it didn't sell. Well, nobody's seeing it. And the gallery has no invested interest in selling that work. I mean, they've got free inventory. Why would they? I mean, if something starts selling, then they go for that. And that sort of makes sense, but it just seems like it's more of a scattershot. Let's see what happens and leave it up to the...
It certainly makes the idea of income much more unstable.
It definitely does.
I mean, and that's, one thing that I think a lot of schools, and I try to talk about it a lot because I teach illustration, that I teach sequential storytelling, is I try to weave into my class plans how to quote things, how to build things, how to get paid for things, because so many people don't talk about it. And it's like, yet most careers, very few places hire an illustrator full time. There are illustration jobs, but most of it is a freelance thing where you were running your own business.
Right.
And you need to get the tools to how to run your own business. And that is very rarely discussed, like sales tax and how to record, expenses and, all of that stuff is very rarely covered. And I think a lot of times they don't like to talk about it because they just want to focus on like concept and work. But the problem is that, if you don't focus on business at all, you're going to end up not doing art for a living. And unfortunately, so many people, I feel like there is a path to make a living as an artist and illustrator, and I have been reading everything for 30 years. But I think that a lot of times, people aren't quite prepared for it. Is almost like being, I don't want to say a plumber, that's a little bit too. You're a specialty technician, and you have to treat it like that.
It's a job.
Yeah, it's a job. I mean, it's not that we don't love doing the work,
Right.
But it is work at the end of the day. I mean, if I was a trust fund person, I just travel the world and sketch things. And it's not that I don't love doing the projects that I do, but I mean, that's how you make a living and that sort of thing. And it needs to be treated that way. Like you had mentioned, you were a cabinet maker, and it's no different than being a cabinet maker.
Right.
And you want to get paid for that craftswork. And that's what it used to be. Like when people painted a baptistry or, did a stained glass or a cathedral, it was just commercial art, and you had a team of people. It was like building a wall, with a team of technicians that knew what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I argue I'm pretty picky about what I like. And, I like to joke, and sometimes it's hyperbole, but I'll say something like, I don't think any great art's been done in the past 100 years. I mean, there's really some great art out there, and things just switch. And I think what it switched from was art being about a universal language that we were speaking. So you would make an image that would speak to the public. And sometimes, and there are a lot of reasons for it politically, and you can talk for hours about it, but it became more about the individual as an artist expressing their own feelings, and, it's like generally when, like if you're, if somebody starts reading your diary, you zone out. I mean, it's like, when someone says, oh, I had a really interesting dream, and you're like, and after they tell you, you're like, well, I suppose that was interesting. I mean, and, sometimes they're fun, but most of the time you're just like, can we talk about something else? And so it's the way I feel that art has gone. And so, for me, when I found the training in New Hampshire, it was so, it's funny because it's stuff I technically did not know. I didn't know how to draw. I felt like I was a pretty bad draftsman when I got out of college. And, my sketchbooks, ended up turning into, instead of me doing these clumsy drawings, I just started writing out these ideas, because I'm like, man, I wish I could render this, it's a good idea, but I can't render it. And so I got to New Hampshire, and it's the Boston School, which we talked about, is it's pretty academic. I guess there's a lineage, and you can track it all the way back to the 19th century ateliers in Paris. And so, and the fun thing about it, too, for me, is that there's a really strong connection to Cincinnati for the Boston School, and that, Frank Dubenek, who was the big teacher at the Art Academy, one of the great teachers, one of the best painters in America, I think.
Another show that was well attended.
Yeah, that was a great show, too. But he taught one of my favorite painters, Joseph DeCamp.
Mm-hmm. And
DeCamp went to Boston and was in the Boston School with Benson, Tarbell, Paxton. And, when you look at those guys' paintings and say, that was the faculty at the Boston School.
Wow.
And it's unbelievable. And the other fascinating thing about that is, there became an explosion at that time of, they were teaching lots of female women painters. And so
Dubenek was one of the first.
Yeah.
Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Women.
And so, so it was a great explosion of really wonderful artists. And really what it was about, it's a nice combination for me of strong academic drawing when I described the Boston School. So it's solid academic drawing mixed with, at the time, the new inventions of Impressionism. Which is odd to think about Impressionism being kind of an invention that was...
But it was.
Yeah. And so, they added that on. So you have, I guess what I would describe as, accurate scene color for the first time. Prior to that, when you see paintings and they all have that kind of dark brown feel, it's because they were painted in the studio. They were painted in the natural light. And so all the training, so I consider myself kind of a contemporary impressionist as a painter. And so I don't really have, I guess I would say, training as an illustrator. But what I did was I just took the training of the scene world and then looked at what illustrators were doing. And some of my favorites from the Golden Age, and the interesting thing about Wyeth is at the end of his career, he started doing like almost impressionistic outdoor paintings. Like he was doing these wonderful, the training was just so solid and exactly what I wanted. And I didn't know it, but when it was introduced to me, it felt like common sense. I was like, how did I, all of it made so much sense to me. And it was just like, for the first time, it wasn't, you're not constructing things really. You're just using your eyeball and drawing what gets projected on the back of your retina, So basically, it's a very solid, just impressionistic view. It doesn't always work for illustration because you can't impressionistically doing drawing of a dragon or, some...
Well, there might be calls for, sometimes there is a call. It depends what.
But I use those skills. So they always have, if Wyeth and Rockwell, I mean, all of them, I think, they used photos to a certain extent, but they were definitely trained in the visual world, so they knew how to use those as tools rather than just...
Well, I think people misinterpret photo reference because you can't just see a photograph and have it be a good illustration for a variety of ways.
Right.
I mean, I always talk, like, particularly fantasy, which is what you do with art.
Right.
I mean, I always describe people that want to be fantasy artists, I describe it as, it's like an opera. Like, you can't draw like normal people, like, they have to be big, right? And that's kind of what comics is like, too. It has to be bigger than life,
Right.
you know? So that's why in opera they have, like, the big hair, the big clothes, the big everything. It's to make it look epic. And so if you draw stuff that doesn't look epic, it doesn't look right.
Right.
And so, yes, you use photo reference, but you have to have, for really good fantasy art, it has to have.
Right. One, interestingly, that's, I think, my main problem with realism in fine art is that it's become, for some reason, I mean, I'm sure you've gotten this compliment before from somebody who walks up and says, "Oh my God, it looks like a photograph."
Yeah.
And I know what they mean, and they mean it with admiration. It still hurts your soul a little bit when they say that, because I mean, a photograph is just a simple machine just made this picture, and it doesn't have it's one lens, and usually photos are
Very distorting.
It distorts it. The color is not usually quite right. The darks are usually too dark, and the whites are usually washed out. And it's interesting when you look at early photography, like the invention of photography. So we're talking, I don't know what
1800s probably.
Yeah, late 1800s, right around there. The photographs, you can tell the photographer was trying to make the photos look like paintings.
Yeah.
And we've become a lot of time, it seems like a lot of painters are trying to make their paintings look like photographs nowadays. I mean, paintings have their unique flavor. They have, I mean, it's a term that I love and I use it all the time because it's so not in so much art as breadth of treatment. And you don't get breadth of treatment in photos unless you do a lot of work to the photo, which you can do. And, like Ansel Adams' photos are wonderful. I mean, there's some great, a lot crapping on photography. But I am crapping on it as a sole means of making artwork. I don't see the point. It's like, it feels like if you wanted to become a musician and you walked into another concert with a tape recorder and recorded that and then walked out and said, "Look what I made." That's just a copy.
It's kind of a segue to the AI, because that's what people do. They put a Google prompt in and they say, "I want a picture of a dragon," and it takes a bunch of people's artwork and makes a little dragon out of it. And then they're like, "I made this dragon."
I know.
Sorry to hijack.
I've used AI a bit, and I play around with it, and it's simultaneously exciting and completely depressing at the same time. So I don't know where that's headed for us.
I think it actually will make a huge demand for hand-done art, because I hope so. I think there's going to be a huge thirst for it, because like so many of the styles like that are done in contemporary fantasy and stuff are still hard to achieve. I mean, people don't understand, and we were talking about this earlier, like doing that type of artwork like you might see on Magic the Gathering or whatever takes such a high level of execution and so much work. And people think it's easy, but it's kind of like, I've always made it analogous to watching an ice skater doing like triple axels and when they fall saying, "Oh, that was easy. Where did they fall?" I mean, painting at that level is that amount of difficulty.
Right.
And a lot of people, because it looks effortless, think it actually is effortless. But you try to paint like that and be that good, it's very hard. It takes a lot of effort and time to make painting right or that good.
Well, it reminds me of
or finished, I guess.
I'm trying to think of it was a Degas who said, painting is fun until you learn how to do it.
Yeah.
And
that's probably true.
And I think it's 100% true. Because you teach these classes. I've taught a lot of landscape painting classes and still life painting classes, and they are fun. And I get people. A lot of times people, I'm sure you've dealt with this a little bit, where it becomes more of a social thing than.
Well, I would argue probably urban sketching is more of the social thought that drawing is mindfulness than plein air, which we're going to actually talk about. That's a good segue into, because you teach a lot of plein air, and it definitely is a different practice than urban sketching. but they're they're adjacent practices.
I would definitely say they're adjacent. I mean, you're trying to get the look of the day in that moment. And it's fascinating when I teach how many people seem terrified of oil paint, and I don't understand that at all. It's not, I'm terrified of acrylic because it dries fast, it gets darker, the colors darken, so you don't know what you're doing. You have to plan for it darkening. Oil, you get what you get, and you can move it around, you can do whatever you want to with it. And again, I think the only thing it's just that you have to use paint thinner to clean your brushes at the end. I don't know why it's so...
I love oil. The reason I don't is I would never get my artwork done early enough to scan it in. Like, I would have time to let it cure. I mean, I probably, for fine art or gallery practice, I probably did. And I don't dislike oils, although oils are a little bit hard. Like, since I do most of my work here, they're I guess you can get oils that aren't as smelling, but it definitely is nice to have a studio that maybe your house is probably not the best place for an oil painting.
I like the smell, and I know it's not that great for you, but
yeah. Well,
I just figure a lot of the great painters over the years were pretty long-lived, and I figure
they made their own paints a lot.
Yeah, they ground their own paints, and they were using lead and cadmiums and some of the horrible stuff, and I've had my lead levels and all that stuff checked, and it's been fine. But, and I know some people have. Actually, Gamble he was allergic to turpentine.
Oh, really? There's some other substitutions that were.
Yeah, you can use other things.
So, what would you say is the big difference between urban sketching and plein air? Like, what are the qualities that are? You said you're capturing the moment,
right?
In paint and light. So it's all about color and light.
It is.
And it has to be fairly quick.
Well, the interesting thing, and I think people are always surprised by this, and this is the same with my still life work, is I tend to save drawing for the end.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, and so that's the hardest thing to keep students in plein air painting from doing is to draw. And say, don't be drawing. So, I mean, so don't sketch out everything. It doesn't become like you draw everything out and then you, almost like not to be a smart ass, but it's almost like a paint by numbers. Okay, so now I have the spaces that I fill with color.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some psychological reasons for this too, I think. I think what happens is people get really satisfied when they get a somewhat accurate drawing. And then they don't worry about the color and the values as much. And they just oh, look, I got it to look sort of like that. and I feel like, well, and then the color and the value sometimes I feel, especially in plein air painting, becomes secondary and they sort of forget about it. And they don't worry about it as much. And I think, well, the most important thing in plein air to me is the light and color, getting that effect of an outdoor scene. And and so there's a lot of things that I think often if you were left to your own devices and just said, just paint this without, the darks are going to be too dark and the lights are going to be too light. Usually we just think that's how we have to make it work. And if you look at most great impressionistic painting, and I use that, we could talk about that a little bit too, but the term impressionism there's a couple, there's the big eye impressionism and the small eye impressionism.
Well, one cases where plein air was kind of invented, sort of.
I think so. I mean,
you're like the probably. I mean, yeah, people drew before that.
Well, I mean, the big eye impressionism is like the name of the group of painters that were alive at that time. So Monet, obviously, and so all those people that fit into impressionism, and you can buy them books with the big eye on it, and impressionism, but. There's painters that most people wouldn't consider impressionist, the idea of impressionism, which is painting the visual order as you see it. And so you can look at a lot of painters. So I like Vermeer and one of my favorite still life painters, Chardin. I mean, they're painting, and Velázquez. And actually, Velázquez is probably one of the bigger impressionistic looking painters. I mean, obviously he wasn't using those colors, wasn't using cadmiums because they weren't invented yet. But you look at his stuff, and you look at his paintings, and he obviously was trying to capture atmosphere, which, before it was heavy line, outline, and then they would fill in, and then, and stuff didn't have that depth and feel that you can get with really good lost and found edges, considering the atmosphere of the room. And so, so that's the thing I like about the Boston School, is it sort of understands that you need solid academic drawing, but that alone can make, it's nice to have that the light and color kind of shoved on top of that, I guess.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about form. That's one thing that I always suggest. Like I when I was talking about sketching and getting the right form, a lot of people, especially when they're drawing architecture, want to draw like the 2 points and make everything go back. And when you do that, it becomes super inaccurate.
Right.
And I always tell people, and this would go along with what you had just described, is rather than is draw the negative space. You're going to get a form much closer to what it is than drawing like, these points and trying to draw it that way. Like, you're not looking at what's there. You're looking at, what you think's there.
Right. Well, and I think...
And the same with color and light, but for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it is... A lot of it is an argument in the brain between what you see and what you think you know.
Yes.
And so... And I always tell people, when you're painting, you're having a conversation with nature. And so you're looking at it and you're just asking questions. And they're simple questions, And so I always tell people, and they always, usually when they ask me what's wrong, I point somewhere and just start asking questions. And they know, usually, and it's like, well, if you know, now you just have to do it, So you just say, okay, is this red, yellow, or blue? And it's interesting because sometimes that question can be challenging, and sometimes it can be a little bit of all of those, but at what percentage, right? So you ask red, yellow, or blue questions, color first. That's where so I go for color first, then value. And that's a challenge, light and dark. Sometimes you'll ask people and it's a harder question than it should be. Should it be lighter or darker? And so the question is, should it be lighter or darker to the actual thing? Mm-hmm. Which is an answer that you might need, but it's also, since if ever you could set up, I'm sure you see this in the urban sketchers. You set up all these people, they can paint exactly the same thing. Every picture looks very much different.
Yes.
But they're all right.
Yes.
Right? So, so there isn't a right answer. There's a right answer for what you did, what your intention was and how you set it up. So I would say, okay, well, you've set up this value scheme and we can have an argument about whether or not I think that's right? And when I'm teaching, I usually try to get them to do what I think is right. You can go off and say, to hell with him, I'm going to do something else. But in my class, it doesn't do any of us any good if we argue, right? So, you just ask, and then the other questions are just spatial questions, does it need, what kind of box would it fit in, a shoe box or a bed box, and you just ask these dumb, so that's negative space questions, and when people start trying to math their way into good drawing by, drawing, what they've seen for how to do perspective. I don't use a ruler and I don't measure much, and you always see, and they're never quite holding into the right angle every time. And you're like, so those measurements, they can be useful, right? But, generally I just say, well, you have a square that you're working in usually, so you relate. So, even when I draw, my first two marks are generally the top and bottom of the thing that I want to fit on the page, and it, it seems like such a dumb thing to have to say to somebody, but how many times have you been in a figure drawing class and someone says, oh, I ran out of room for the feet. And how did you, that should have been mark number 2 to make sure it fit.
Oh, yeah. Well, I get sketches all the time from students where they do something really weird on the side of the page. And it's you can't do an illustration like that.
Right.
The put shorter than it needs to. get another piece of paper and finish the drawing properly and then scan it in and put it together. Or don't mutate it because of bad planning.
Right. Or in the worst case, you say, well, this isn't going to be the final piece. And so that's why, I mean, aside from the other thing I do, which is so it's weird because I'm in, I guess what I consider these kind of related but different worlds. So there's the plein air aspect, which is, probably more closer to the urban sketching. And I probably should actually come plein air paint while you guys are sketching.
We've had people come with their setups,
right?
The boxes and the paint boxes and stuff. I mean, we're still painting outside. I mean,
right.
I think that the goal, there's a lot of similar goals. Actually, one of the big things now in urban sketching is reportage, which is sketching events as they sketching things as they happen. And there's some really interesting reportage artists because it captures things in a different way than, say, just taking photos do.
Right.
Again, because it starts getting into more of a feeling and editorial thing, and it's filtered through your personal lens. And one could argue that's what plein air is too.
For sure.
I think I heard someone say once, what you choose to sketch is as important as what you don't choose to sketch. And, you could say that about painting too. Why do you avoid painting this?
Right.
As far as students, like most of the time when I do sketches, for an illustration assignment, why didn't you draw the hands? Like, well, I can't draw hands. I said, you need to get used to drawing hands on there. Just scribble something with fingers, just get used to including that as an expressive part of your drawing. Yeah. The whole thing when you're talking about draftsmanship and drawing, like so many people are afraid to tackle whatever it is. And to me, whether you're drawing a figure or a building or whatever, it's all the same practice. I think that, or still life. Like it's all form, negative, space, and value. And it doesn't matter if it's a cathedral or an orange. Like it's all the same practice. And when you don't see that, it makes everything much more difficult for you.
Right. Well, and often for me when I teach, I'd rather teach somebody who has no training.
Interesting, because they aren't open to me.
Yeah, people. Yeah, I mean that's a thing, and I never have understood that way. You want to take a class and argue with the person teaching the class. I mean, you sign up for this. I mean, I didn't make this. Isn't. I always say that in first class. This isn't debate class.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna say what I say, and I'm my critiques. I think I'm pretty nice. I'm not. I don't judge people. I don't, but I am judging your drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And I am going to say, I occasionally started to critique with a laugh. So just like, what are you doing? So, and I think usually you can talk people into figuring out how to see. And it's just this whole, and the interesting thing I think is that, people always ask about art books. And again, I know you just put a book out, but I often say, there aren't that many great art books that have been done in the past 100 years. I mean, so you got to read. I read some super, the really old book. Usually, I don't have very many pictures of it. It's the ideas of the art. It's the ideas of how to think as an artist.
Mm-hmm. How to see and how to.
Yeah. So like the Harold Speed. Have you ever read any of that?
Like that, but I'll have to check it out.
And he has a really good discussion about seeing,
because that's the most important thing is the seeing.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's one of the hardest things. And segueing back to art school, I think one of the biggest problems they have with art school is a lot of times, especially when you get to the college level, you've kind of been drawing, and your grandma loves your work, your family tells you you're really good and stuff, and then you go in a college atmosphere and kind of the way things are now, you don't necessarily get extreme criticism there either. And then you graduate and you realize, oh my gosh, competing with the best people in the world. Right. And it's like, no one's calling me to do artwork.
Which is the harshest criticism of me.
Yeah, I mean, when you're not getting, when no one's buying your work, and then that's a harsh thing. And then you've been told by everybody, oh, that's really great, whatever you've done, and I'm not, and I think that's one of the harshest realities when you get out is you're trying to build a business with this work, with this body of work, and you're not getting anywhere with it. You're just not getting traction. It's very important that you have a market for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that's, that you have to give so much attention to that.
Right. Well, and then the fine art market. I know a lot of fine artists, and I'll do a commission, and they act like, oh my gosh, I can never, I think I'd have a hard time with commissions. And I'm like, what? I don't understand your problem here. I don't. I mean, someone's offered you money to do something for them. I mean, I do have my limit, right? I will, I rarely say no. I'm not a pet portrait guy, but if you wanted me to do a picture of your pet, I'll do it. It's just that thing, if you want me to paint a picture of your toilet, I'll do it. I mean,
actually, I think I might take you up on that. I like the painting of that. Okay. That would be awesome.
I mean, it's my job to make it a very uplifting and pleasant picture of your toilet. And so, I mean, that's what the artist brings to it. Otherwise, like we sit and take a picture,
I think that there's a tyranny of so much photography. Like when I sketch, when I travel and stuff, like it's so much more interesting than seeing photos of the same thing.
Right.
I think again, it's like your personal editorial thing.
Right.
I mean, it may, I think it's much more interesting drawing stuff and how you take in the world. And I think that's kind of what urban sketching's mission is it's sort of like, how do you see the world and how do you express it through drawing? And it's sort of a little bit more meditative than plein air is, because in a way, like the act of urban sketching is sometimes more important than what the end result is, because part of it is like the sensory experience of seeing people walk around, right, and being outside. And plein air has that too. I mean, you're outside because it's nice to be outside and painting and not in your studio. I mean, there's a sensory component to it that I think is really important.
Oh, for sure. I paint. I have people in class that will say, "Oh, I'm going to take a photo and finish this."
That's not the same thing.
It isn't the same thing. Another soul crusher when people say that.
So that's the similarity. Is urban sketchers get really pissed off.
Right.
Like there are some really hardcore, and it's like you are not allowed to work from photographs ever. It's like it all has to be captured while you're there.
And I don't believe that either. I have worked from photos to finish plein air work, but usually it's when I go from large, to large scale work. Mm-hmm. I'll use my study, maybe a photo if I need it.
That's a different practice. I mean, if there's nothing wrong with it, it's not plein air.
Yeah, it isn't. Well,
like if you're
that's more a studio painting.
That's a painting, and there's nothing wrong with doing a studio painting. But there's no issue. I mean, I think most people would argue in urban sketching that if you want to sketch for a photo, that's fine. Do a painting for a photo. It just don't call it an urban sketch because you haven't been. Sketching on location for them is a huge.
Yeah, I've been in local plein air painting events where I was sitting next to somebody who was at their easel, not painting the scene, but painting a photo that they brought with them.
And you're like, aren't there plein air competitions where you literally, I think they have one in Marima. I've done it where you literally paint there and then they judge them right after they bet.
Yeah.
And that's good.
And I guess I don't do a whole lot of, the short, I guess the difference for me is that like I'll plein air paint, but I'll do a 2-foot painting that I'll go back to for 3 weeks for a 3-hour period every day that has similar light.
That's kind of cool.
And so most of my bigger plein air paintings are done on site, but it's a little different in that I will.
No, it's still be considered plein air. I'm not as expert. So how much do we?
And it just means open air, so you're painting outside, and so there's no time description or on any of that for the work. That's the hard part to teach about painting, and that's why I like still life. For mostly, that's what I teach. If I want somebody really wants to learn how to paint, I say we need to do some plein air because it opens your eyes up to color. But then when you work in the studio, that's where you understand how to render form and get compose. Because I think if anything, the weakest component of the arts these days is just composition.
And that's where I said design needs to be paired with illustration, because if you have bad composition, the rendering almost is because it all is part of the communication and the piece.
Right. And so that's the hardest thing to shake out of the students, which just, or anybody who's, trying to figure out how to make good work, is that, I teach a still life class, and usually what I do is I tell them to bring some objects you want to paint. And they come with this idea of what they want to paint. I'm like, let's just figure out a good design. And so sometimes that will involve, so I did a large scale picture, the one that I had in Green Acres. It was a 5 foot by 3 foot painting, still like all painted from life. And it took me a long time to paint that picture. It took me 2 weeks to set it up. I designed it for 2 weeks before I even started. And so generally when I tell people, I say you just have to have the stuff that you want to paint in mind. You're going to set the scene, and you're going to make sure it has all the things that you need to make a good picture. And so, again, it's similar to the questions I asked. Does it have good red, yellow, blue arrangements? Now, I'm not talking Lego colors. I'm talking, red, yellowish, bluish. It's nice to have a spectrum because colors can be featured if they're related to other contrasting colors. Or, the same thing with value. Is the value arrangement good? And then are the shapes in the right spot? And it's just this constant adjusting and moving and seeing how it works in the light and how the two objects work together. And so when I do a still life class, the first class is just setting it up. And people want to draw. They want to draw so bad. I want to get started. I'm ready. People are like, no, you're not. That's a terrible arrangement, Yeah. I mean, you could paint it.
You're kind of teaching people the fundamental of design. For sure. And that's probably a good way to learn design, is how to set up a still life.
Right.
Is, like you said, so many people don't know where to start with design. And really, anytime you sit down and do a plein air sketch, the first thing is designing your piece.
Right.
It's like, what do I want to put here? What do I want to put here? And if it's bad design, it's not that interesting.
Well, and you can't rearrange trees and move buildings.
But you can move.
But you can step to the left, and it's like, well, there's trash can right in the middle of your seat. You realize that. You're like, well, what do I, and it's like, well, you can ignore it, which is, you can not paint every full, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you can also,
compositionally, you can move stuff.
Right.
Because there's a tangent there.
For sure.
You don't have to necessarily, ruin that thing with a branch that you want to show the whole thing.
But, that happens all the time. It's like, I'm not sure I like this picture, and then I'll pick up their easel and move it like 2 feet this way. Like, how about that? Like, oh, yeah, that's better. Yeah, walk around for a while first before you...
Yeah, come and see the place.
Yeah.
See what you was at. You don't have to trap yourself. And a lot of people kind of build their traps themselves. Like, they don't...
Sure.
And I think that's just through experience. And so I would guess that, like, plein air is probably a lot closer to urban sketching than you would imagine. It's just, the different components, probably different materials.
And I think a lot of the traps are fear and, and not feeling secure enough to just... I think they just get afraid. So they say, well, I'll just start drawing. And something will happen, And I think that's the thing, is people don't realize how much work it takes to make a really good picture. It's hard. I mean, it's like the same thing with filmmaking. I mean, you could put the best actors, the best director, and still make a shitty movie. Yeah, it happens.
Okay, now you're talking about Disney again.
Don't get me started about that. But, you're just like, how... My problem, it's that Disney has made me not feel that bad about the writer's strike. It's like,
you're like, I don't have to watch any more badly written.
I think ChatGPT can do a better job that's on the writing in some of these shows. But it's a lot of work. It's hard to make a good anything.
I think you're right. I think a lot of people underestimate what it takes to put into, and that is a segue back kind of to being an illustrator, is that, illustration is a composition exercise, and it is work. You're being paid to be at a high level of craftsmanship and being able to communicate and deliver the type of work that they need for their product, and that's not something everybody is capable of doing.
No. And the thing that's interesting, I think if you're interested in having this job, I think maybe not everybody, but I think most people could learn it, I mean, I think, people just, it's like saying, well, I don't know how to play tennis. Well, you could take some lessons. You can learn how to play tennis. Probably will not be John McEnroe. You might be, but chances are most people are not going to be. But you could become a pretty good tennis player if you decided that's what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And I feel like art is very similar. When people, and I think the same with music, like concerto. I had a student say the other day, I want to be really good, and I'm not as good as, and I was like, well, you can't start out playing a concerto. I think you have to play scales first. Yeah. You have to practice first. You have to build your practice, and it's going to take years to get to the level of these people whose work you're admiring. Right. When I was learning how to draw in New Hampshire, we were doing cast drawings, and I don't know if you know what that is, but it's where you just set up a plaster cast. You put it in good light. You usually have a white back.
It's a
white
dark sort of.
Yeah, and so, and it's nice they're doing that at. They're doing a lot of that at Manifest.
Right now, you could walk there, so you can.
Yeah, I could.
You need to teach there.
Possibly. Yeah, I really haven't been teaching much since COVID. I sort of fell out of it, and then I enjoyed having my Saturdays actually back a little bit. I would teach. I probably will teach again. It's just been a while, and I've been pretty busy doing other stuff. What I was going to say was, I was reading through your book, and you're talking plein air stuff. And here, it's the same thing, really. Mm-hmm. And, and I do think when you're standing out in the sun and sweats rolling down your back, that you can feel that instead of painting, I think. All that stuff adds to what's going on. And so I really do think there's a lot of similarities between plein air and what you're talking about in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And, I do think, for me, how long would you say you usually draw?
Well, we're usually up for a couple hours. We usually, a typical outing is 2 hours. And then, of course, the zoo, or for urban sketchers, usually, we get a drink or feed afterwards.
Right.
And that's what you really need to come to is our bourbon sketchers outings. That's a different, there is one this Thursday that I don't have time to go to, but
okay.
Do you have any final message, about people starting a practice or that are interested in plein air or urban sketching and getting started?
Well, when people ask about what they should do, I often say, if you're new to it, search out people who are doing work that you like and ask them if they teach, and there's a lot of people that are teaching. And, it's the same thing, like what I was saying, I was sort of not joking about trying to talk people out of sending their kids to art school. And there's so many great places to study painting now.
Well, you could take an online class with Greg Manchester,
right?
On sports school.
There's ateliers in every state. They're all over the place, and some are better than others. And some are going to be maybe not affordable to certain people. Depending on how far you have to travel and stuff. But a lot of times, honestly, that's what I did. I went to Carl Sampson's house and said, will you teach me? And unfortunately, he just had twins and was burying, and he was like, I would love to. And he does teach now a little bit, but he was just too busy. But he pushed me up to some other people, go talk to them. And so, but he put me in the right direction. And most artists are very helpful. And honestly, I think if you want to learn, go to the best that you can find and figure out, and join groups and hang out with other artists. And figure out, what are they doing? Where are they having for lunch? You figure out what makes them tick.
Exactly, yeah.
And so, and generally once, and you're going to make good friends that way because usually you have the same interests and you're into the same stuff, and you share resources, and you might lead to group shows, and it might lead to sales. It might lead to commissions. You never know. So
well, a lot of times it's referrals. Artists for each other. I get referrals all the time.
Right. Yeah. Like someone says, someone for some reason asked me to paint their toilet, and I don't want to do it. Will you do it?
Exactly. Sure. So I'll get a call from somebody saying, Richard doesn't want to paint your toilet, but I'll do it.
Yeah. Actually, it's probably the other way around. I know I want someone who'll do this, creates a job.
Well, on that note,
I'm going to bring in my work, and I'm going to start painting your toilet right now.
okay, great.
We'll figure out a price schedule, and it'll be great.
All right, what are your socials? Where can people find you, Richard?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find because there aren't very many people named Richard Luschek. I have a website, richardluschek.com, and I'm on Instagram. I think it's also Richard Luschek. I'm not very creative with my names on the socials. And I'm on Facebook. I also have a Patreon. As we said, I illustrate for a role-playing game called Harn. That it's kind of a smaller, niche little role-playing game that's been around since the 80s. And I've been illustrating that for 20 years. So I have a Patreon where I do game characters. And so I'll post 3 full-color game characters a month. So we've got a pretty good following on there. So if you're interested in any game characters for your nerd ventures, you can follow me on that.
Okay, thanks for joining me, Richard.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Hopefully